For a while now, it sounded like SpaceX is always just 1 or 2 steps away from landing on the moon. Big rockets launch, stainless steel ships explode and fly again. NASA keeps talking about Artemis like it's already in motion. But when you zoom out, something feels off. The moon landing keeps being described as imminent, yet it never quite arrives. That disconnect is where most of the confusion lives. People hear SpaceX moon landing and picture something like Apollo, just newer. Astronauts climb down a ladder, flags, footprints. But what's being planned today is nothing like the missions from the 1960s. It's more complex, more ambitious, and far less certain. It depends on technology that has never worked at full scale, on timelines that assume everything goes right, and on a private company building the most powerful rocket ever created while learning how to refuel it in space. At the same time, SpaceX really is central to NASA's return to the moon. This isn't a side project or a publicity stunt. NASA has put its future lunar plans in SpaceX's hands in a very real way. Billions of dollars are involved. Astronaut training is already shaped around hardware that doesn't yet exist in final form. So when people ask whether SpaceX is actually going to land humans on the moon, the honest answer isn't a simple yes or no. It's a moving target. Some pieces are surprisingly far along, others are barely off the ground, and a few of the hardest problems haven't even been tested yet. To understand what's really happening, you have to separate the headlines from the engineering and the promises from the requirements. Once you do that, the picture becomes clearer and a lot more interesting. The reason SpaceX is tied so closely to the next moon landing comes down to a single decision by NASA. Instead of building its own lunar lander the way it did during Apollo, NASA chose to outsource that job. In 2021, it selected SpaceX to provide the vehicle that would actually take astronauts from lunar orbit down to the surface and back. That vehicle is a modified version of Starship, often called the Human Landing System. NASA isn't buying the rocket outright. It's paying SpaceX to deliver a capability. If Starship can safely land astronauts on the moon and return them to orbit, SpaceX gets paid. If it can't, the mission doesn't happen. That structure shifts a huge amount of risk onto SpaceX, but it also gives the company far more freedom to design and test the system its own way. This lander sits inside a much larger plan called Artemis program. NASA's Space Launch System rocket carries astronauts in Orion to lunar orbit. From there, they transfer to Starship, descend to the surface, live and work on the moon, then launch back up to rejoin Orion for the trip home. It's a split mission with 2 completely different spacecraft built by different teams. What makes this deal unusual is how much NASA is trusting something that hasn't flown yet. Starship has never carried people. It has never refueled in orbit. It has never operated near the moon. In Apollo, NASA tested each piece step by step before committing astronauts. This time, several unproven systems have to work together on the first crewed attempt. NASA knows this. The agency accepted the risk because Starship offers something no other lander can: massive cargo capacity, room for long surface stays, and a design that could support repeated missions. The trade-off is uncertainty. NASA didn't choose the safest option. It chose the one that could change what moon missions look like, if it works. Everything about the moon landing hinges on Starship working the way SpaceX hopes it will. Not in theory, but in reality. This isn't just a new spacecraft, it's a full system that has to do things no rocket has ever done before, and it has to do them reliably with people on board. Starship is enormous. It's taller than the Saturn V and designed to be fully reusable. To make a lunar mission possible, SpaceX has to launch Starship into Earth orbit, then send up multiple tanker versions to refill it with propellant. Only after that can it head toward the moon. Orbital refueling has never been done at this scale, and it has never been done with cryogenic propellants that want to boil off in space. Then there's landing. The moon has no atmosphere, which means Starship can't use heat shields or aerodynamic control. It has to descend entirely on engine thrust, hovering and settling onto the surface with extreme precision. The engines are mounted high on the vehicle, so SpaceX has to manage massive plumes blasting lunar dust in every direction. That dust isn't harmless. It can damage hardware, obscure sensors, and coat anything nearby. Even getting back off the moon is non-trivial. Starship has to launch from the lunar surface, reach orbit, and dock again, all after sitting in deep cold for days. Every valve, line, and computer has to work after exposure to radiation and temperature swings that are harsher than anything in low Earth orbit. The explosions people see during Starship tests are part of how SpaceX learns, but they also underline the gap between testing and operational readiness. A rocket that can survive a few dramatic failures still has to prove it can fly dozens of times without one. Until Starship demonstrates orbital refueling, long-duration space operations, and controlled landings without atmosphere, it remains the single largest unknown in the entire Moon plan. In short, the Moon isn't waiting on astronauts. It's waiting on Starship to grow up. Early on, the idea was simple. NASA talked about landing astronauts on the Moon in the mid-2020s, and SpaceX sounded confident it could meet that schedule. On paper, it looked aggressive but achievable. In reality, almost every major milestone has taken longer than expected. One reason is that many of these steps depend on each other. Starship can't practice lunar missions until it can reach orbit reliably. It can't leave Earth orbit until refueling works. It can't carry astronauts until NASA certifies it safe. A delay in any one of those areas pushes everything else back. And several of them are still unproven. Another factor is that Starship development is happening in public. Test flights fail, vehicles are redesigned, and timelines shift in real time. That transparency makes delays feel more dramatic, even though long setbacks are normal for rockets this complex. The Saturn V took years of slow, methodical testing. Starship is being built faster, but it's also attempting far more. NASA's own schedule adds friction. The Space Launch System and Orion capsule, both required for Artemis missions, have had their own delays. Even if SpaceX were suddenly ready tomorrow, the rest of the architecture might not be. A moon landing only happens when every piece lines up at once. As of now, a crewed landing depends on at least one uncrewed Starship lunar demonstration, multiple successful refueling tests, and sustained flight reliability. None of those boxes are fully checked. That's why official dates keep sliding without firm replacements. What matters more than the calendar is the order of events. When you see Starship refuel in orbit, operate for long stretches without issues, and land precisely where it's told, that's when the timeline becomes real. Until then, any date is more of a hope than a plan. When a SpaceX-led moon landing finally happens, it won't resemble Apollo at all. There won't be a single rocket launching straight to the moon with everything on board. Instead, the mission will unfold as a chain of carefully timed steps, spread across weeks and multiple launches. First, a Starship designed for deep space travel launches into Earth orbit. After that, several tanker Starships follow, each one docking and transferring fuel. This is the quiet backbone of the mission. Without it, nothing else works. Only once the lunar Starship is fully fueled does it leave Earth orbit and head toward the moon. Meanwhile, astronauts launch separately aboard NASA's Orion capsule on top of the Space Launch System. Orion carries them to lunar orbit, not to the surface. There, Orion and Starship meet. The crew transfers between vehicles, leaving behind the ship that will bring them home. The descent to the moon is slow and deliberate. Starship fires its engines continuously, lowering itself straight down rather than arcing like Apollo did. Because the engines sit high on the vehicle, astronauts are far above the surface until the last moments. There's no ladder. Instead, elevators are planned to move crew and equipment down dozens of meters to the ground. Surface stays are expected to last days, not hours. The vehicle itself acts as a habitat with room to move, store gear, and run experiments. This isn't a flag and footprints mission. It's meant to test long-duration living on another world. When it's time to leave, Starship launches directly from the moon and returns to lunar orbit to rendezvous with Orion. The crew transfers back, Orion heads for Earth, and Starship is left behind or sent elsewhere. If it works, it changes what moon missions mean. If it doesn't, it fails in very public ways. Either way, it will look nothing like the past. So what's actually happening with SpaceX's moon landing is less dramatic than the headlines and more demanding than most people realize. This isn't a race to plant a flag. It's an attempt to build a reusable, scalable way to operate far from Earth. And the moon is the first real test of that idea. SpaceX isn't stalled. It's working through problems that only show up when hardware meets reality. Some progress is visible, like increasingly capable test flights. Other progress happens quietly, in software, plumbing, and procedures that don't make for viral clips. NASA, for its part, has tied its return to the moon plans to a system that still needs to prove itself, accepting delays in exchange for a much bigger payoff. That's why the situation feels confusing. The mission is real. The challenges are real. The uncertainty is real too. A moon landing will happen only after a long list of unglamorous milestones are crossed, and most of those matter more than any announced date. When it finally does happen, it won't feel sudden. It will feel inevitable because by then, the hard parts will already be behind us.